Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, the channel where curiosity meets chronic drowsiness. If you've ever wondered what Halloween feels like at 40 degrees below zero, you're either very brave or very bored. But since you're already here, and probably horizontal, let's lean into it. Tonight, we're heading to a place where the darkness lasts for months. The wind howls like a lost opera singer, and the average pumpkin wouldn't last a day without thermal insulation. This is Halloween in the Arctic, a land where ghosts wear snow boots, lanterns run on whale oil, and the dead don't rattle chains. They just politely knock on the ice. Before we begin, a gentle reminder. If you enjoy drifting into unconsciousness to the soothing sound of historical nonsense, go ahead and tap that like button. Softly, the way a polar bear taps the surface before breaking through. And subscribe, so you can join us every week as we put the brr in bizarre anthropology. Now, let's set the scene. Imagine a world of white, endless, soundless snow stretching to the horizon. The sun has packed up and left for the season, leaving behind a sky that glows only with moonlight and faint green curtains of aurora. For most people, this sounds like a bad vacation. But for those who lived here, the Inuit, the Sami, the Chukchi, this was home. And in that home, the line between life and death wasn't just thin, it was frosted. When nights last for months, you start to hear things. Whispers in the wind, footsteps that stop when you listen. Maybe it's your imagination, maybe it's hypothermia, or maybe, just maybe, it's the spirits of hunters, travelers, and ancestors walking softly beneath the snowdrifts, checking in to see who remembered to refill the lamp. Long before Halloween existed, the Arctic already had its own haunted season. Every winter was a festival of survival and superstition. People lit whale oil lamps not just for warmth, but to keep the ghosts away. They whispered stories of Sedna, the sea goddess who lived beneath the ice, and of the Angakuk, shamans who could speak to the dead by drumming until their souls slipped through the cracks in reality. And somewhere in all that, you can almost see it, the earliest flicker of what we'd call Halloween, a night for remembering, fearing, and laughing at the dark. Except here, the laughter froze mid-air. Picture a group of families huddled inside an igloo. The lamp flickers, shadows stretch like fingers across the walls. Someone tells a story about a hunter who ignored the spirits and went missing in a storm. No one breathes too loud. Outside, the wind shifts, and for a moment, everyone swears they hear him whistling. That's Arctic Halloween. No costumes, no candy. Just the slow heartbeat of firelight and the knowledge that, in this part of the world, everything, even silence, has a spirit. As the centuries passed, explorers from Europe brought their own ghosts, saints, devils, sailors who froze mid-voyage. They met local myths, shook hands, and decided to share the haunting rites. And somewhere in the melting pot of folklore and frostbite, October's spooky season took on a chill of its own. But tonight isn't just about fear, it's about warmth, the tiny human kind that survives inside impossible cold. Because if there's one thing Arctic people understood, it's that stories are fire you can carry. And every ghost story is really just a reminder to keep that fire lit. So pull your blanket tighter. Let the sound of the wind, or maybe my voice, hum in the background. And imagine that outside your cozy room, snow is falling softly over ancient trails and frozen seas. The dead are out tonight, not to scare you, but to keep you company. And if you listen closely, you might just hear them laughing too. Welcome to Halloween in the Arctic, the coldest night of the dead. Now let's step out into the dark and meet the spirits that never thaw. There's a strange magic in the Arctic sky, a rhythm that forgets how to tell time. In summer, the sun refuses to set. It circles the horizon like a sleepy guard who's forgotten his shift ended 6 months ago. But in winter, the opposite happens. The sun gives up entirely, takes a long nap somewhere, over the equator, and leaves everyone else to figure out how to cope with eternal night. For ancient Arctic people, that wasn't just inconvenient, it was supernatural. When the sun vanished, they didn't see it as astronomy. They saw it as a test. The world had turned its face away, and the darkness that followed wasn't empty. It was full of whispers, movements, and things you weren't supposed to name out loud. Imagine the first evening of the long dark. You're standing on the ice, your breath curling like thin ghosts in the air. The last streak of sunset fades, and suddenly the world feels paused. The snow reflects nothing. The silence is so complete, you can hear your heartbeat behind your scarf. That's when the elders used to say, the spirits woke up. Not maliciously, just curiously. Like neighbors who noticed the lights went out next door and came over to check. Some said they were the souls of hunters lost to storms. Others believed they were ancestors wandering home for a visit. And a few claimed the darkness itself had feelings, that the long night was alive, and it listened when you spoke. So people spoke carefully. Inside snow huts, families gathered close to whale oil lamps that hissed and flickered like nervous hearts. Children listened while the old ones told stories of the sun's journey through the underworld. A cosmic commute that would one day bring daylight back. Until then, everyone had to keep the world alive with flame, song, and storytelling. No one went far alone. If you had to travel, you carried charms carved. Not from bone, or whispered a quick apology to the wind, just in case the wind had opinions. Dogs, they said, could sense the unseen. Sometimes they would bark at empty snowfields, ears pinned, tails low, staring into the dark as though someone had whispered their name. No one liked it when that happened, but there was comfort too. The night wasn't only frightening, it was familiar. The stars hung closer here, bright enough to cast shadows. When the aurora began to shimmer, green, red, sometimes violet, people believed it was the spirits dancing, warming the sky with movement. Children were told not to whistle at the lights. It might call the dead too close, or invite them to snatch your hat for fun. Apparently, even in the afterlife, fashion matters. As months of darkness rolled on, time became slippery. Day and night blended into one long blue-black dream. People measured existence by meals, by the smell of burning fat, by the slow creak of ice outside the walls. And in that drifting state, the line between memory and haunting blurred. The voice of your grandmother telling a story at night might, for a heartbeat, sound like the echo of someone long gone. Modern visitors sometimes describe a similar feeling, a kind of pleasant unease. After weeks without sunlight, the mind begins to paint its own colors on the dark. Shapes appear in the periphery, a figure beside a snowbank, a shadow that moves when you don't. Science calls it sensory deprivation. The locals just call it company. Archaeologists once found ancient carvings in Greenland showing half human, half animal, shapes dancing beneath a ring of stars. Some scholars think it depicted shamanic rituals. Others think it was just someone drawing the northern lights for fun. But maybe both are true. Maybe art was the way they kept the dark from swallowing them whole. Every scratch in bone, every song hummed against the wind was a reminder. We're still here. Halloween, in its warm climate origins, celebrates the thinning of worlds, that moment when the living and the dead can briefly share a doorway. The Arctic didn't need October 31st for that. It had months of doorways, endless nights where every lamp was a prayer and every creak might be an answer. The cold didn't separate the living from the dead. It preserved them together side by side in memory and ice. Sometimes travelers returning after long hunts said they heard laughter under the snow, as if old friends were waiting below, amused at how long it took them to come back. Sometimes when the wind blew through hollow cliffs, it sounded like singing. The people would smile and say, "They're reminding us to keep the lamps lit." And so they did. Every flame mattered. Every story kept the universe turning. Because in a place where the sun disappears, belief is the only sunrise you get. So tonight, if you ever find yourself far north, in a cabin, wrapped in blankets, the world outside reduced to frost and silence, remember that you're never really alone. The darkness there isn't empty. It's crowded with memory, patience, and maybe a few ghosts still waiting for dawn. They're polite, of course. They'll wait quietly by the door. If you ever want to know how to make a ghost story sound soothing, ask an Inuit elder. Their tales don't start with lightning or thunder or someone opening a door they shouldn't. They start with the sound of wind, soft, endless, and slightly amused that you thought you could ever escape it. In the Arctic, the wind isn't background noise. It's an audience. It listens, comments, interrupts, and sometimes imitates. When the old storytellers spoke, they'd pause to let the wind react. A sudden gust here, a sigh there, like applause from invisible guests. And what guests they were. Because in Inuit legend, the Arctic is full of spirits. Not just the souls of people, but of animals, tools, and even weather itself. Every seal had a soul. Every stone had a story. Every blizzard had a bad mood. The dead didn't leave. They recycled. A hunter's spirit might return as a polar bear. A beloved dog might come back as a gust of snow that knows the way home. To outsiders, that might sound poetic. To the Inuit, it was just logistics. When everything is frozen half the year, reincarnation is the only form of recycling that really works. But not all spirits were friendly. Some came back hungry, cold, or confused, the kind of guests who arrive uninvited and stay until spring. The most feared were the Kalapiluit, sea witches said to live under the ice, waiting for children who strayed too close to the cracks. They wore tattered parkas made from eider feathers, their skin green from the cold, their breath like fog. If they caught you, they'd pull you under, not to kill you, but to keep you. Forever. It wasn't meant as horror. It was parental advice disguised as myth. In a land where falling through the ice could end your story in seconds, fear was the best babysitter. Another legend tells of the shadow walkers, spirits who followed travelers during snowstorms. They didn't speak, didn't help, didn't harm. They simply walked behind you, close enough to feel but never close enough to see. If you turned too suddenly, they vanished. If you ignored them, they kept pace. People said they were the souls of hunters who never found their way home. And so, out of respect, travelers left tiny offerings, a bit of seal meat, a bead, a few whispered words to the wind. Eat, rest, don't follow me tonight. There was a gentler kind of haunting too, the Teriak suit or shadow people. They lived parallel to the living in invisible villages beneath the snow. Their lives mirrored ours. They hunted, sang, raised families, but in silence, beneath the ice. Sometimes it was said the worlds overlapped. A hunter would hear laughter below him or see a faint light moving under the frozen sea. It wasn't danger, it was a reminder. You are never the only one living here. It's easy to see how these tales began. When your world is made of white and silence, your mind fills in the gaps. The crunch of distant snow might be an echo, or it might be someone walking in your footsteps from a century ago. The hiss of the wind through a crack in the igloo might sound like breathing, and the human brain, ever creative, thinks, "Oh, company." But there's something oddly comforting about it all. Inuit ghost stories aren't designed to make you scream. They're lullabies with lessons. They teach respect for nature, for memory, for the invisible things that keep you alive without asking for thanks. Every winter, families gathered in their snow houses, lamps glowing gold, and the storyteller would begin. The children would huddle close, listening to the slow rhythm of words, half chant, half heartbeat. Outside, the wind joined in, weaving between sentences, and for a few hours the dark world beyond those snow walls felt less like a threat and more like a theater. When Christianity arrived in the Arctic, some of these tales were dismissed as superstition, but they never really left. Even now, elders tell them during long winter nights. Even now, hunters feel the prickling on their necks when the wind changes direction. And sometimes, in the lonely glow of a snowmobile's headlight, someone swears they see a figure in the distance, walking, pausing, waiting, only to vanish when approached. It's always chalked up to exhaustion or fog or the mind playing tricks. But in the back of every Arctic traveler's head, the same thought whispers, what if it wasn't? There's an old saying in the north, the land remembers everything, every step, every fire, every breath leaves a trace. Maybe that's why the Arctic feels haunted, not because of what died there, but because nothing ever really leaves. The cold keeps secrets better than any tomb. So if you ever find yourself out there, far from the last village, surrounded by silence so thick it presses on your ribs, don't be afraid if you hear the wind whisper your name. It's probably not calling you. It's just practicing pronunciation. And if you hear footsteps behind you, steady and soft, don't turn too fast. Just nod politely. Because somewhere under that frozen moon, the living and the dead are still taking the same long walk home. Every haunted land has its queen. For the Arctic, that queen lives beneath the waves, cold, furious, and covered in the fingerprints of everyone who ever forgot to say thank you. Her name is Sedna, and she's one of the oldest spirits in the frozen north. You could call her a goddess, but goddess feels too calm, too civilized. Sedna is more like the Arctic itself, beautiful, terrifying, and not especially interested in your opinion. Her story begins with something heartbreakingly human, a bad marriage. Once upon a long icy time, Sedna was a young woman who refused to marry. Every suitor that came to her family's tent, hunters, traders, promising sons of neighboring clans, she turned away. Some say she was too proud. Others say she simply liked her independence and warm seal furs. Either way, her father grew tired of her stubbornness. Then, one day, a handsome stranger arrived. He was dressed in fine clothes, carried rare gifts, and promised a life of comfort. Sedna agreed, perhaps reluctantly, and left with him across the sea. It was a mistake, because, as it turned out, the handsome stranger wasn't a man at all. He was a bird spirit, a storm petrel in disguise. When Sedna reached his island, he dropped the act, shed his human form, and revealed his true self, feathers, claws, and a nest made of fish bones. Instead of fine meals, Sedna ate raw scraps. Instead of songs, she heard screeches. And instead of a loving husband, she got a bird who never cleaned up after himself. Eventually, Sedna's father realized his daughter was in trouble. He paddled across the freezing sea in his kayak, found her weeping on the shore, and helped her escape. But the bird spirit saw them and called up a storm, wings beating the wind into fury, waves rising like mountains. As the kayak rocked and water filled the boat, the father panicked. And then, he did something truly awful. To save himself, he threw Sedna overboard. She clung to the side, screaming, her fingers gripping the edge. But the cold was stronger than pity. Her father took his knife and chopped at her fingers, one by one, until she sank beneath the black water. And from those fingers, they say, came all the creatures of the sea, seals, whales, walruses, fish. Sedna herself sank to the ocean floor, where she still lives, her hair tangled with seaweed, her heart frozen, her rage eternal. Now she rules the deep, a goddess not of mercy but of balance. When people forget to show respect to the animals they hunt or waste what the ocean provides, Sedna tangles her hair and locks away the sea's bounty. No fish, no seals, no food. And the only way to calm her anger is through a shaman, an angakuk, who must descend in spirit form, comb her hair, and ask forgiveness. It's one of the most hauntingly tender images in all mythology. A shaman floating through cold, dark water, gently untangling a goddess's hair while whispering apologies on behalf of mankind. A divine hair appointment centuries before salons existed. To the Inuit, this isn't just a story about punishment. It's a reminder that every living thing comes from a sacrifice, that the world's generosity is built on pain, patience, and the delicate work of forgiveness. It's also, incidentally, the best reason ever not to litter. Because if Sedna sees you tossing plastic into her ocean, she'll remember. And she holds grudges for geological time periods. When missionaries first arrived, they tried to replace Sedna with saints and scripture, but she never really left. Even today, in some Arctic villages, hunters still offer a drop of water, a whispered word, or a bit of oil to the sea before heading out. Just a nod of respect to the woman beneath the waves. It's fascinating how many Halloween-like ideas echo through Sedna's myth. A descent into darkness, a restless spirit seeking fairness, a story of betrayal, transformation, and haunting. Except here, the monsters aren't evil. They're teachers. They remind people that nature has memory and that every act of greed echoes back. Imagine sitting inside a snow hut on a winter night, listening to the old ones tell Sedna's story. The flame flickers, the wind outside moans against the ice, and somewhere in the distance you hear the crack of sea ice shifting, a sound like someone sighing from deep below. You might glance at the waterhole where tomorrow's hunt will begin, and for a moment swear you see hair moving beneath the surface. Not seaweed, not current, just Sedna, brushing her locks, waiting for you to remember your manners. She's not a villain. She's just cold, in every sense. So when people today celebrate Halloween in the Arctic, carving snow lanterns, dressing up as ghosts, laughing into the night, they're really carrying forward the same old lesson. The dead, the gods, and the world itself will forgive you. Eventually. But not until you clean up your mess. And if your fishing nets come up empty one morning, maybe don't blame luck. Blame the sea woman. And bring her a comb. If you live in a place where ink freezes before it dries, you learn to tell stories differently. You don't write them, you carve them. Before books, before paper, before pencils that actually worked at sub-zero temperatures, the Arctic kept its memory in bone, ivory, and driftwood. Every scratch, curve, and notch was a word, a ghost caught in art. And maybe that's what made it so powerful. The stories couldn't just vanish into the air. They stayed, trapped in the ribs of walruses and the antlers of caribou, whispering through the centuries. Some carvings were practical, maps, hunting charms, tools with simple patterns that marked who made them. But others were warnings. Tiny sculptures of distorted faces, hollow eyes, stretched mouths, figures that didn't look quite human or quite animal. They told stories about what happens when you forget the rules or when you wander too far into the ice alone. Each carving, in its own quiet way, was a campfire in solid form, something to keep fear from spreading too widely. You couldn't always see the spirits that haunted the night, but you could hold a piece of bone in your hand, feel the grooves beneath your fingers, and remember that other people had seen them too. It was a comfort and a warning. She rolled into one. When European explorers eventually stumbled into the Arctic and found these carvings, they didn't understand. They thought they were idols or decorations. They never imagined that they were archives, history textbooks written in walrus tusk, the first literature of frost. One famous piece found in Greenland shows a man with two faces, one calm, one screaming. Archaeologists call it the dual spirit, though the locals have always known better. It represents what happens when a person forgets to share what they've hunted, or mocks the old spirits of the land. The calm face is who you are by day. The screaming one is what comes for you at night. And honestly, that's better horror writing than most streaming services manage today. Children grew up surrounded by these stories. A carved mask over the doorway wasn't just decoration, it was a bouncer, a protector against ghosts, bad dreams, and nosy neighbors. When the long winter settled in and the night stretched endlessly, families would gather, and one by one, the elders would take out carvings, set them in the lamplight, and retell the stories they held. You could almost hear the carvings listening back. Some were beautiful, intricate things, seals diving, hunters with spears, the fine arcs of sled dogs frozen mid-run. But others were downright disturbing. Twisted figures with missing limbs, empty sockets, and jagged mouths. These weren't horror for fun. They were visual sermons, reminders of balance, generosity, and respect for the unseen. If you carved something frightening enough, maybe you didn't need to actually meet it. Sometimes the materials themselves carried weight. Whalebone was sacred, part of Sedna's realm, her underwater kingdom of memory. Ivory from walrus tusks gleamed like frozen light, prized not just for beauty, but for what it symbolized: endurance, survival, and the ghosts of every hunt that came before. To carve on it was to speak to the past. Arctic artists still do this today. You can walk into small workshops in Nunavut or northern Greenland and see men and women hunched over tusks and antlers, coaxing stories out of the grain. Some pieces end up in museums, others are kept in families for generations. But no matter how modern the tools become, the essence stays the same. Every mark is an offering. There's something quietly haunting about that. Art is a pact between the living and the dead. Every chisel stroke says, "I remember you. Don't come back angry." And isn't that what Halloween really is, in its heart? A promise to the ones who came before that we haven't forgotten them. We dress up, we tell stories, we laugh at fear. But beneath the fun, there's an ancient human rhythm. Keep the spirits entertained, and they'll stay friendly. Ignore them, and they'll get creative. So imagine an Arctic night centuries ago. A man sits by a lamp made from stone and whale oil. Outside, the wind presses against the igloo walls, humming through the snow blocks like breath through a flute. In his hands, a sliver of bone catches the light. Slowly, carefully, he begins to carve. Each scrape echoes softly. Each curl of ivory falls like snow. When he's finished, he holds the carving up to the flame. It's a small face, part human, part animal, the expression unreadable. He sets it beside the doorway, nods once, and blows out the lamp. Outside, the wind rises, then calms. Somewhere far off, the ice cracks like a sigh. And inside the dark, the tiny carved face gleams faintly, as if it's still awake, keeping watch through the long night. So if you ever find yourself in a museum staring at an old piece of Arctic bone art, remember, you're not looking at decoration. You're looking at a ghost story that never needed words. There are places in the Arctic where the air freezes before it reaches your lungs. You open your mouth to speak, and your words fall out as crystals. They drift to the ground, melt, and vanish. That's how silence is made here, not by lack of sound, but by temperature. After a few weeks of this, you stop blaming the weather. You start thinking it's personal. Because in the far north, people didn't just feel the cold, they believed in it. The cold wasn't a number on a thermometer. It was a living thing, a patient, invisible creature that watched from the horizon, waiting for the careless. They called it by many names: Silla among the Inuit, Frost Mother in old Sami stories, or simply the White One that walks. Not evil, exactly, just persistent. like an ancient debt collector who never forgets where you live. When you're surrounded by endless ice, it's easy to see why people thought this way. The cold moves like a predator. It arrives without sound. It hunts without shape. You don't see it coming. You just notice your eyelashes turning to glass, your breath shrinking to a whisper, your fingers forgetting they exist. To survive, you have to treat it like an old, dangerous god. Show respect. Move slowly. Don't boast. Never say out loud, "It's not that cold," because that's when the ghost hears you, and that's when it comes closer. The Inuit had a saying, "The cold loves pride because it tastes better." Travelers told stories of men who challenged the cold, who went out too lightly dressed, too late at night, or too far from camp. They didn't freeze, people said. They were taken. Their spirits joined the White One, a wandering host of frozen souls that drifted together over the tundra, whispering like snow in the wind. Sometimes, when the air was still and your lamp burned low, you could hear them passing outside, a faint hiss, like 1,000 sighs in unison. That was the cold people, looking for company. But there were gentler stories too. Some believed the cold wasn't just a hunter. It was also a healer. It preserved what mattered, kept memory intact. A loved one lost to the frost wasn't gone. They were sleeping, waiting for the world to warm again. And every spring, when the ice cracked and rivers ran free, the living whispered thanks, not because the cold had left, but because it had let them stay. That's the thing about Arctic ghost stories. They don't separate fear and reverence. The same force that can kill you also keeps you alive. It's not good or bad. It just is. Like the ocean, or gravity, or that one coworker who never blinks during meetings. Even today, scientists stationed at polar research bases tell stories about the cold. Not myths exactly, just strange sensations. A door that opens by itself during a windless night. A voice on the radio repeating a sentence no one remembers saying. Footprints that start at the middle of nowhere and end right beside your tent. Every explanation is rational, expansion, static, shifting snow. But the human brain doesn't care about rationale at 40 to 60. It cares about stories. The Sami people in northern Scandinavia used to describe the Frost Mother, a pale woman who drifted through the valleys at night, her hair made of snow and her hands made of air. If you saw her, it meant one thing: you'd stayed outside too long. But if you treated her kindly, if you bowed your head, covered your face, and whispered a greeting, she might let you pass. They said her touch could freeze a tear before it fell. Or, if she liked you, stop the wind for a few heartbeats so you could breathe. In some tales, the Frost Mother had children, tiny ice spirits that danced in the air around campfires drawn by heat. When people laughed too loudly or told rude jokes about the weather, the frostlings crept closer, snuffing out the flames in revenge. That's why Arctic laughter always has a quiet edge, joy, but never arrogance. Because the cold has ears. And here's the part that still feels hauntingly true. In the Arctic, you can't really fight the cold. You can only negotiate with it. Layer by layer, flame by flame, you make small offerings: warmth, patience, humility. And in return, the cold lets you exist. When modern people say, "It's freezing," they mean they forgot their gloves. When Arctic people said it, they meant the ghost is here. So picture it now. You're standing outside at midnight. The snow glows blue in the aurora's light. Your breath drifts upward, slow and steady. Then, for just a moment, the wind stops. The world goes utterly still. It feels like someone is watching, not cruelly, just curiously. Like the land itself is deciding whether to keep you. Then the wind sighs again, gentle and cold, and you feel it brush your cheek. Not frostbite, a greeting, a reminder. that even the coldest things in this world have a pulse. In most parts of the world, light is just there. You flick a switch, and it obeys. But in the Arctic, light is a creature you have to feed. Before electricity, before kerosene, before even candles, Arctic families lived by the glow of one fragile invention, the quollic, the whale oil lamp. It was the heart of every home, carved from soapstone, filled with seal or whale fat, its flame coaxed to life with a twist of moss or Arctic cotton. One small oval of fire surrounded by endless dark. The quollic didn't just give light, it was life. It cooked the food, warmed the air, and kept the spirits, both human and otherwise, from getting too restless. If it went out unexpectedly, people didn't see it as an accident. They saw it as an omen. Each night, someone, usually the women, would tend to the lamp. They trimmed the wick carefully, reshaping the flame with a bone tool called a takuti. Too low and the flame would die. Too high and the soot would mark the walls, a sign the spirits were displeased. It was a delicate dance, part science, part prayer. And perhaps without realizing it, they were inventing the world's coziest religion, worship by warm lighting. Imagine it. Outside, there's nothing but snow, silence, and the occasional polite growl of a distant polar bear. Inside, the air hums with warmth. The walls glow amber. The flame flickers, casting soft shapes that look suspiciously like people you remember. Someone hums an old tune. Someone else stirs the stew. It's not a feast, but it's enough. And in that moment, you realize this quiet, careful glow is the only thing standing between you and forever night. It's easy to see why the lamp became sacred. Some Inuit stories say the first woman, Nuliajuk, created the sun and moon by lighting two lamps in the sky. Others say the stars themselves are sparks from the quollics of ancient ancestors, souls who kept tending their flames long after death. So when Halloween eventually drifted north, with its jack-o'-lanterns and flickering porch lights, it found a strange kind of déjà vu waiting. Those glowing pumpkins weren't new. They were echoes of the Arctic's oldest symbol, fire as a guardian. In both worlds, the message was the same. Light keeps the dark at bay. Not just the physical dark, but the kind that lives quietly inside us. Fear, loneliness, the suspicion that maybe we're the only ones awake in the universe. The quollic says otherwise. It says, "You're not alone. Someone else is keeping their lamp lit too." There was a saying among elders, "The flame listens." People spoke softly near the lamp, as if not to disturb it. When someone passed away, the family kept a quollic burning for days, so the spirit would find its way home. No one left it unattended, not because it was dangerous, but because it was company. In the far north of Greenland, explorers once reported seeing faint lights along the horizon, deep in uninhabited valleys. They assumed it was mirage or atmospheric reflection. The locals smiled and said, "No, those are the old ones' lamps. They still burn." Of course, modern life dimmed that mystery. Electric bulbs replaced oil lamps. Generators hummed where silence used to live. But every Arctic home still has a light somewhere, a candle, a small flame on a winter night. And for a moment, the old warmth returns. There's something beautifully universal about that. Across centuries, cultures, and climates, humanity has always trusted light to do emotional heavy lifting. When it flickers, we panic. When it glows, we breathe. Even now, we light candles for comfort, for memory, for mood, as if our DNA still remembers the old whale oil flames that kept us alive. Every Halloween, millions of people put small fires in carved gourds and set them outside their homes, not realizing they're repeating the same ritual Arctic people practiced centuries before. Different shape, same purpose. A beacon against the unknown. If you ever find yourself far north during the polar night, you might still see that same kind of light, a faint, steady glow in a window surrounded by infinite blackness. It's not much, but that's the point. In a place where daylight disappears, hope doesn't come in floods. It comes in flickers. And sometimes that's enough. So tonight, before you drift off, imagine this: a single flame, golden and quiet, floating in the dark. The snow presses gently against the walls. The wind circles the house but never enters, and the old whale oil lamp hums softly as if it's breathing with you. That little light has been burning for thousands of years. Through storms, through silence, through every long winter humanity has ever survived. And somehow, it's still here. Somewhere above the Arctic Circle, there's a moment, one final reluctant sunrise. When the sun hovers at the edge of the horizon, like it's deciding whether this job is really worth the effort. Then quietly, it quits. It doesn't storm off or slam any doors. It just stops showing up. And that's how winter begins. For months afterward, the Arctic world becomes a place of permanent twilight, a blue dream that never fully ends, where noon looks like midnight and midnight looks like the inside of a whale. People still wake, eat, and talk, but it all happens in a strange kind of slow motion, as if time itself has been wrapped in fur. To the first Arctic peoples, this wasn't just weather. It was an event, the long night, when the balance between life and death tilted ever so slightly toward the latter. They said the sun hadn't vanished. It had simply gone traveling, visiting ancestors, checking on other worlds, maybe just taking a well-deserved nap. But still, they missed it. When the final light faded from the sky, families would gather for ceremonies that mixed reverence with mild panic. Children were told to behave. Don't shout, the sun is sleeping. Hunters whispered to the darkness before, leaving camp, asking permission to move unseen. Even laughter had a hush to it, like it didn't want to wake the night. The elders told stories to keep courage burning. They spoke of the first dawn, when a woman made of fire and a man made of ice danced so wildly that sparks became stars. They promised that as long as people kept their lamps lit, the sun would find its way home again. And every day that passed without daylight felt like another test of faith. It's strange, isn't it? In most ghost stories, people fear the dark because it hides the unknown. But in the Arctic, darkness is the known. It becomes familiar. A roommate you didn't ask for, but learned to live with. After a while, people stop fearing it. They start naming it, greeting it, even trusting it. Scientists who spend long winters in northern research bases talk about how their minds adjust in weird ways. At first, they crave light. They sit near UV lamps, drink extra coffee, start conversations with houseplants. But after a few weeks, something shifts. The constant night starts to feel protective. They describe it as a blanket, heavy, quiet, endless, that makes the outside world feel far away and unimportant. That's when they begin to understand what the old myths meant. Because when the sun disappears, you stop living by sight. You start living by sound, by smell, by instinct, by every subtle sign that you're still part of something alive. The creak of ice outside the walls becomes the heartbeat of the world. The sound of breathing beside you feels sacred. And when you light your lamp, it's not just for vision, it's for connection. The Sami people in northern Scandinavia had a beautiful way of describing this. They said the winter darkness wasn't an enemy. It was a time of listening. A season when the world held its breath so the living could hear the whispers of the ancestors. In that sense, the Arctic winter was one long seance, months of shared quiet between generations. There's something profoundly Halloween-like about that. Not in the spooky sense, but in the tender one. Both are about thresholds, about honoring what's gone while still staying warm enough to laugh about it. Both remind us that the line between here and elsewhere isn't a wall. It's just dim lighting. Imagine the first night after the sun leaves for good. The air is so still you can hear snowflakes land. You step outside and look up at a sky that glows faintly green with aurora. For a moment, you wonder if it's the sun sending postcards from wherever it's gone. Back inside, the lamps burn low. Someone hums softly, an old lullaby meant to coax the daylight home. And even though no one says it out loud, everyone's thinking the same thing. Please come back. We're not done yet. Weeks pass, then months. The stars begin to shift. The cold grows sharper, almost impatient. And one morning, if you can still call it morning, there's a faint line of gold on the horizon. It's so thin you might mistake it for imagination, but it's real. The sun, having finished whatever cosmic errands it had, peeks back over the edge of the world. People cheer, cry, or just stare quietly, blinking against a light they'd almost forgotten. For the first time in months, shadows return, proof that the world still remembers how to make them. It's funny how that works. You never really appreciate sunlight until you've lived in a place where it's a rumor. You never value warmth until you've heard the cold whisper your name. The Arctic teaches that lesson better than anywhere else. Light is precious because it's fragile. And the dark, no matter how endless it feels, is always temporary. So the next time you see the sunrise, wherever you are, take a moment. Pretend it's the first one after a very long night. Let it hit your face and feel, for just a second, like you've survived something ancient. Because you have. If you've ever stared too long at a frozen lake, you'll know the feeling, the sense that something's moving under there. A slow pulse of light, a shift in the shadows, the faintest echo of breath. It might be the current, it might be your reflection. Or, if you'd asked an Arctic hunter a few hundred years ago, it might be someone else. Because in these frozen lands, not everything that looked human stayed that way, and not everything that looked like an animal actually was. Long before werewolves and vampire myths drifted up from Europe, Arctic people were already telling stories of shapeshifters, souls who crossed the border between species the way others crossed snowdrifts. They weren't monsters exactly. They were lessons, proof that everything alive shares one thin, invisible breath. The most famous were the Selkies, seal people who lived in the ocean by day and shed their skins to walk on land by night. Their stories traveled across the North Atlantic, from Greenland to Iceland to the coasts of Scotland, carried by traders, sailors, and probably a few bewildered seals. By moonlight, they said, the Selkies would come ashore, lay their sleek skins on the rocks, and dance, awkwardly, joyfully, like creatures who'd finally escaped gravity. If someone found and stole a Selkie's skin, that Selkie would be trapped in human form, forced to live among people, often marrying one of them. But they never stayed forever. So long as their skin existed, their heart belonged to the sea, and one day, they always found it again. The Inuit had their own versions, tales of Turngate or spirit helpers that could take the shapes of animals to guide or protect humans. Sometimes a shaman would borrow their form during rituals, traveling through the spirit world as a bird, a bear, or a seal. Other times, it worked the other way around, animals borrowing human shapes to wander among villages unseen. It wasn't trickery. It was diplomacy, a reminder that humans weren't the center of the story. They were just part of the cast. But not all shapeshifters were kind. Some legends tell of Kivituk, people who broke taboos or committed crimes so terrible that they fled into the wilderness and were changed by it. They grew wild, fast, and cold-hearted, able to move through snowstorms like ghosts. They hunted humans, not for food, but for company. Because loneliness, in the Arctic, is a predator of its own. There's something deeply human in all of this. That strange, ancient instinct to blur the line between ourselves and the world around us. When everything you depend on has teeth, the seals, the whales, even the weather, empathy becomes survival. The hunter must think like the hunted. The human must imagine being fur, fin, feather, or snow. And in those moments, the old storytellers said, you were no longer one thing or another. You were between. Modern scientists might call it animism, the belief that everything, even a rock, has a soul. But that word feels too clinical for what the Arctic people actually meant. They weren't worshiping objects. They were keeping up relationships. If you took a seal's life, you offered water and a small apology to its spirit. If you built a snow house, you thanked the snow. If you spoke too proudly about surviving, you whispered a correction later, so the wind wouldn't hear you bragging. Because in a world that could kill you for arrogance, humility was the strongest magic. Every culture in the north had their shapeshifters. The Chukchi in Siberia told of whale spirits that could appear as men, tall, quiet strangers with eyes that shimmered like water. They came to test a village's hospitality. If they were treated kindly, the next hunt would be blessed. If not, storms followed. Basically, divine customer service with very high stakes. Even the Sami people in northern Scandinavia told of Stalu, clumsy, troll-like giants who could disguise themselves as humans, but always gave themselves away through their greed. They were a warning that not every face you meet in the snow belongs to someone warm inside. And then, of course, there's the most Arctic shapeshifter of all, the ice itself. It's never just one thing. It cracks, drifts, reforms, and vanishes, alive in slow motion. It traps reflections, devours sounds, and sometimes, under the aurora, glows with colors that make it look almost sentient. If you've ever walked across frozen sea and heard the deep groan beneath your feet, you know that feeling, like you're stepping across the chest of something enormous, and it's holding its breath. It's easy to see why the people of the North believed the boundary between human and nature was paper thin. They lived on that edge every day. So the next time you stand beside an icy lake, watching your reflection ripple and fade, try not to think of yourself as an outsider looking in. Think of yourself as part of the story, one more creature waiting to see what shape the world will give you next. And if, while you're staring, you happen to see movement beneath the ice, a face, a flicker, a seal that looks suspiciously like it's smiling, don't be afraid. Just nod. You're both made of the same water after all. Every culture has a way of saying, "We remember you." Some do it with flowers, some with candles, and some with Facebook memorial pages. But in the Arctic, remembrance came on a plate. When the long winter swallowed the sun and the night stretched endlessly, Arctic families held what might be the quietest, strangest dinner party in the world, a feast for the forgotten. It wasn't called Halloween. There were no pumpkins, no costumes, no sugar comas, just simple food, shared warmth, and a seat left empty for those who never came home. The idea was simple. The dead still hunger, but not for meat or fat. They hunger for memory. Forget them, and they grow cold. Remember them, and they draw close, curious, content, a little less lonely. So, once or twice a year, depending on the region, people prepared a meal not just for themselves, but for the invisible. They laid out bowls of seal stew, morsels of fish, cups of melted snow water, and pieces of bread or dried berries. Sometimes they'd even set utensils beside the offerings, because good manners don't end at death. And then they'd wait. Not for ghosts to appear. No one expected flickering apparitions or spooky moans. The Arctic isn't theatrical. The visit was quieter, subtler, a shift in the air, a sound of snow settling outside, the lamp flame bending for no reason. That was enough. You didn't need proof when you already lived surrounded by mysteries. Some Inuit families left food out on the ice overnight, where the ancestors were said to walk when the stars were bright. By morning, the offerings would be covered in frost or gone entirely. Children would ask what happened to it, and the elders would smile. The dead were hungry, they'd say, and they ate politely. Others believed the spirits preferred to share the meal invisibly. As the living ate, so did the dead, bite for bite, breath for breath, which, honestly, makes overeating at these feasts feel slightly rude. The Sami people of northern Scandinavia had a similar custom. They'd pour a small portion of broth or beer on the ground before drinking, whispering the names of ancestors as it soaked into the snow. Each drop was a greeting, a promise that the family line still remembered its roots. It wasn't superstition, it was gratitude, the spiritual version of tipping your waiter. There's something wonderfully humble about that. In most places, Halloween is about scaring yourself for fun. In the Arctic, it was about sharing warmth with the invisible. The goal wasn't to keep spirits away, it was to keep them company. One Arctic legend tells of a woman who forgot to leave offerings for her dead husband. That night, she dreamed of him knocking gently on the ice window, asking, "Did you forget me?" She woke in tears, went outside, and placed a plate of food on the snow. By dawn, it was gone, and she said she never felt alone again. Maybe that's the secret of these rituals. They weren't meant to summon ghosts. They were meant to comfort the living, to remind them that love doesn't freeze, even when everything else does. In a strange way, this feast wasn't so different from modern Halloween's roots in Samhain, the Celtic harvest festival that honored the dead before winter set in. Thousands of miles apart, under different stars, humans made the same discovery. Darkness feels less frightening when you fill it with food and stories. The Arctic version was simpler, maybe more honest. No candles or costumes, no frantic attempt to disguise oneself from the dead. Why would you? You wanted them to find you. You wanted them to sit by the lamp, hear the laughter, and remember they still belonged. Some say the spirits lingered after the meal, curling up near the warmth like tired travelers. Others believed they followed the scent of whale oil smoke back to their world, satisfied for another season. Either way, the living slept easier afterward. The dead were fed. The night had been kind. It's hard not to love the practicality of it all. There was no fear, no drama, just courtesy between worlds. The same way you'd lend your neighbor sugar, you'd lend your ancestors a little supper. Even now, in remote Arctic communities, bits of that tradition survive. People still light small lamps or place food near the window during long, dark winters, not because they expect visitors, but because they like the feeling that someone might be watching fondly from outside. It's not creepy, it's comforting. And perhaps that's why Arctic ghost stories rarely sound like horror movies. They sound like reunions, because here, death doesn't take, it returns. It knocks softly, it asks politely, it eats neatly and disappears before dawn. So tonight, wherever you are, imagine this. Outside your window, snow is falling in thick, soundless flakes. Inside, there's a single bowl of food left on the table, steaming gently. The lamp flickers once, a small hello, and for a moment, the world feels full again. The dead are fed, the living are warm, and the Arctic night hums content and full of stories. There's a saying in the Arctic, no one ever truly disappears, they just keep paddling. And if you've ever watched the horizon at twilight, you might believe it. Because sometimes, when the air is still and the sea is frozen into silence, people swear they can see them, the ghostly kayaks, gliding across the ice fog. No splash, no sound, no wake. Just faint shapes, moving with perfect rhythm, paddles rising and falling in eerie synchronization. It's said those are the souls of the lost hunters, men and women who went out to sea and never returned. Not doomed, not damned, just delayed, still trying to make their way home, long after the body gave up. In life, Arctic hunters had a bond with their kayaks that bordered on spiritual. They weren't just boats, they were second skins. Each one was made by hand, perfectly fitted to its owner's body. The width of the shoulders, the curve of the back, even the reach of the arms. A kayak wasn't something you owned, it was something you became. So when a hunter died at sea, the two were inseparable. The spirit and the kayak set off together on a final voyage, a slow drift through the afterworld, where the ice met the stars. You could call it tragic, but to the Inuit, it was beautiful, a promise that no one faced the next world alone. Old stories say that on calm nights, when the moonlight shimmers across open water, you can still see the kayakers of the dead. Their silhouettes glide past the horizon, paddles catching light like silver wings. They never look back, and they never tip over. And if you listen closely, you can hear the faint sound of paddles slicing through water. Shh, like the world's slowest heartbeat. Once, a young hunter from Baffin Island told his grandmother he'd seen them, hundreds of tiny kayaks moving in a perfect line across the bay. She nodded and said, then someone remembered them. Because, she explained, the dead only appear when the living think of them kindly. Forget them, and the sea stays empty. Remember them, and the horizon fills with light. That's a comforting thought. That memory itself can steer the dead. The Arctic's relationship with the sea is complicated. It gives everything, food, fuel, travel, and takes just as much. Families grew up knowing that the ocean was both cradle and grave. So they didn't treat it as an enemy. They treated it as a landlord, one who occasionally demanded rent. Before a hunting trip, people would offer small gifts to the waves, a sip of water, a piece of fat, a whispered promise to return what they took. It wasn't superstition, it was good manners. Because when you depend on the sea for your life, you keep the conversation polite. The legends of the spirit kayaks probably began as a kind of comfort story. When someone didn't come back, you didn't say they were gone. You said they were still paddling. It was a way to soften the loss, to imagine them out there somewhere, navigating a different kind of current. Not vanished, just underway. And maybe that's why the image stuck. Even centuries later, sailors from Europe wrote about strange lights moving along the coastlines, like lamps on invisible boats, drifting in perfect silence. They called them Arctic will-o'-the-wisps. The Inuit just smiled and said, "Our people are traveling again." Some explorers even claimed to hear voices over the water, low, rhythmic chants carried by the wind. It wasn't language they could understand, but it always came from the direction of the horizon, where the fog thickened and the world felt thinner. Maybe they're singing themselves home, one captain wrote in his diary before losing his ship to the ice. In a way, it's the most Arctic ghost story imaginable. Not fire and brimstone, not rattling chains or haunted mansions, just the soft persistence of motion. The sound of people who loved the sea too much to stop moving, even after death. And there's a quiet lesson in that too. That sometimes the best way to honor what's lost isn't to build monuments or shout into the wind. It's to keep paddling, to stay in rhythm with the world, even when it feels endless. When modern Inuit artists carve tiny kayaks from bone or ivory, they often make them deliberately small. Smaller than life-sized, smaller even than logic allows. Because those miniatures aren't toys. They're vessels for spirits, offerings for the unseen. Each one is a prayer disguised as craftsmanship. So if you ever stand on an Arctic shoreline, wrapped in layers and staring at the sea, and you think you see something move out there, don't panic, don't run, just wave. Because whoever they are, they've been on the water a long, long time, and they'll appreciate the company. And maybe, just maybe, when the tide turns and the aurora dances above, they'll paddle a little closer. Not to frighten you, but to remind you that nobody truly vanishes. We all just keep drifting somewhere beneath the same cold moon. If you ever find yourself alone on the tundra and you hear a wolf howl in the distance, don't be afraid. It's not necessarily bad news. It might just mean someone's keeping an eye on you. The Arctic night carries sound for miles. A single howl can stretch over valleys, bounce off glaciers, and echo through frozen air until it feels like the world itself is speaking. For the Inuit, the Chukchi, and the Sami, those voices in the dark weren't just noise. They were messages, weather reports, hunting forecasts, or sometimes gentle reminders to behave. You see, in most of Europe, wolves were villains, the hairy antagonists of fairy tales and bedtime warnings. But in the Arctic, they were neighbors. Dangerous, yes, but also dignified. They hunted what people hunted, endured what people endured, and survived the same merciless conditions with better fur and fewer complaints. Many Arctic peoples believed wolves had a direct line to the spirit world. They were messengers, guardians between realms. A wolf's howl could guide lost souls, warn of coming storms, or call the aurora to dance above the snow. Killing one without cause was considered reckless at best, cursed at worst. If you did, it was said the pack would remember, not out of vengeance, but justice. Because wolves in these stories always kept receipts. There's an old Inuit legend about a hunter who disrespected a wolf. He mocked it, threw stones, and scared away its prey. Later that winter, the hunter lost his way in a blizzard. When he thought he was done for, he heard howls circling him in the dark. Then, one by one, wolves appeared, not to attack, but to sit. They formed a ring around him, their breath steaming in the air, keeping the wind at bay. By morning, he was alive. When he returned home, he stopped telling jokes about wolves. The Sami people told gentler stories. They believed wolves were once dogs who grew tired of humans and wandered into the wilderness, choosing freedom over obedience. But because they'd once shared our fires, they still recognized us. A lone traveler could call out to them with the right song, a low melodic hum that said, "I mean no harm." If the wolves accepted it, they would walk alongside, silent escorts through the snow. It's comforting, in a strange way, to imagine that, a line of shadowy shapes moving just beyond the edge of vision, keeping pace with you through the dark. Unnerving, yes, but not unkind. Even today, Arctic herders talk about wolves with an odd mixture of frustration and admiration. They curse them for taking reindeer and then compliment their strategy. They build fences to keep them out and then leave scraps behind so they don't have to come looking. Because in the Arctic, everything that survives earns respect, even the competition. Some ghost stories say wolves can sense spirits before humans do. When a soul wanders too far from its body, wolves begin to howl in long, mournful notes. They're not warning you, they're guiding it back. In this way, the howling of wolves became a kind of hymn for the dead, a reminder that even loss has its shepherds. There are darker tales too, of course. Stories of Amalut, shape-shifting wolves who could walk upright in human form, hunters of men who grew teeth for justice. They appeared in storms or during the long night, stalking those who broke taboos, stole food, or disrespected the land. They didn't kill exactly, they corrected. And afterward, the survivors were said to wake with claw marks on their hearts. But for every tale of terror, there's another of mercy. Because in the Arctic imagination, wolves weren't chaos. They were order, nature's quiet accountants, making sure no one took more than their share. Scientists who study wolf packs today would probably agree. They're not the wild savages of old legends. They're disciplined, family-oriented, and surprisingly democratic. Every decision, from when to hunt to where to sleep, happens by group consensus. Basically the world's most efficient committee meeting, only fuzzier and with better attendance. Maybe that's why their howls sound so eerie to us. Because deep down, we recognize something familiar. A communication older than language. A reminder that we used to be listeners too. Imagine it now. You're walking across a frozen plain under the northern lights. The sky ripples green and violet. Your breath hangs in the air like smoke. Then you hear it. A long, rising call that fades into the distance, answered by another and another, until the night hums like an orchestra made of ghosts and wind. You pause, heart steady, not afraid, because you understand what it means now. The wolves aren't warning you away. They're just letting the world know you're here, alive, small, and part of the great breathing rhythm of the north. So when you lie in bed tonight and hear a far-off sound, maybe the wind, maybe a dog, maybe something older, take it as a good sign. It means you've been noticed. And in a world this vast, that's a kind of blessing. In the far north of Scandinavia, where trees shrink into shrubs and snowdrifts become furniture, live the Sami people, reindeer herders, singers, and quiet philosophers of the cold. If the Inuit mastered the sea and the ice, the Sami mastered the middle ground, that wide white wilderness where the horizon has opinions. And for them, the most sacred creature wasn't the wolf or the bear. It was the reindeer, patient, stubborn, unreasonably photogenic. The animal that made Arctic survival not just possible, but poetic. To the Sami, reindeer weren't livestock. They were relatives. They carried people, fed them, clothed them, and warmed them, though admittedly not voluntarily. But the relationship went both ways. Herders spoke to their reindeer in soft voices, never shouting. They believed each herd had a guardian spirit, a presence that kept the animals calm and the predators cautious. If you treated your herd with respect, the spirit would stay nearby, keeping watch. If you were cruel or careless, it would leave. And so would your luck. This belief wasn't some abstract philosophy. It was practical. When you live in a land where storms can erase entire trails in minutes, you learn to depend on invisible things, intuition, rhythm, and the quiet intelligence of animals. The Sami said reindeer could sense danger long before humans could. They would turn suddenly, stamping and snorting at what looked like empty air, and, more often than not, moments later, a whiteout or a predator appeared. Some stories say the reindeer weren't reacting to weather at all. They were reacting to spirits, the wandering dead who roamed the tundra, drawn to warmth and movement. To the Sami, these weren't evil beings. They were simply restless travelers without maps. And the reindeer, wise old souls that they were, could feel their passing. That's why, before setting out on long migrations, herders would light a small fire and whisper a few words to the unseen. Keep our path clear, they'd say, and we'll keep the flame burning. The smoke drifted into the night like a handshake between worlds. There's something beautifully undramatic about Sami spirituality. No fire and brimstone, no thunder god scolding mortals for fun. Just a simple truth. The world is alive, and you're renting space. Treat your neighbors, even the non-human ones, politely. Music for the Sami was part of that conversation. They didn't have hymns in the traditional sense. They had joiks, haunting, circular songs that weren't about something, but were that thing. A joik could be a person, a mountain, a feeling, or yes, even a reindeer. When someone sang your joik, it was like they'd called your soul to the surface for a moment. On long nights, herders sang joiks to their herds, slow, low melodies that rose and fell with the wind. They said the animals recognized their song and followed the sound like a compass. Some herders even claimed the spirits of old reindeer, those who died years ago, would return at the edge of the herd during migration, walking alongside their descendants like shimmering ghosts made of mist and memory. It wasn't spooky, it was comforting. Because the Arctic teaches a different kind of logic. When everything is covered in snow, the past doesn't disappear. It just waits for spring. Of course, outsiders didn't always understand this. When missionaries arrived in the 17th century, they frowned at the drums, the songs, the fires, the little reindeer rituals. They called them heathen nonsense. But the Sami quietly kept their traditions anyway, humming joiks under their breath, carving symbols into sleigh runners, lighting fires that burned both for warmth and remembrance. Because you can't convert a landscape, you can only live in it politely. Modern Sami artists still perform joiks today. Some blend them with jazz or pop music. Some keep them pure. One voice, no instruments, looping through ancient melody until it feels less like a song and more like breathing. And every time they do, it's as if the reindeer spirits gather around again, curious and calm, listening from the other side of the snow. So imagine it now. A night so still you can hear the northern lights hiss. The herd moves like a slow river of fur and antlers. Somewhere nearby, a herder hums a joik, low, steady, unhurried. The sound drifts over the snow, mingling with the wind, and for a heartbeat, you can almost see them, faint outlines beside the herd, glowing softly, walking in time with the living. If you ever visit Sami country and you hear bells in the distance, that's the reindeer. If you hear singing and can't tell where it's coming from, that's the herder, or maybe something older. And if you feel the air shift, just slightly warmer, as you pass through a frozen valley, well, maybe the herd's guardian is saying hello. Because in the Arctic, the boundary between worlds isn't a wall, it's snow. Soft, shifting, and never entirely solid. And sometimes, all it takes to cross it is a song. If you've ever heard a drumbeat echo across the Arctic night, you'll understand why silence is overrated. One steady rhythm, low, patient, ancient, can fill an entire world of snow. And for the Arctic shamans, that rhythm was more than music. It was a key. Among the Inuit, the Sami, and other northern peoples, shamans, or Angakuk, Noaidi, Tadibia, weren't just medicine men. They were translators. They spoke for both sides of reality, the living and the invisible. They could listen to the wind and understand it, argue with sickness, bargain with spirits, and occasionally, according to legend, take a short business trip into the underworld. Their most famous tool was the drum, a round frame of wood covered in animal hide, stretched tight like the skin of the sky itself. When struck, it didn't just make sound, it opened doors. Each beat was a step, each rhythm a path, each vibration a small rebellion against gravity. In the Arctic, where every sound vanishes into the cold, the drum's voice traveled far. It could be heard across villages, over ice fields, even, some said, between worlds. And when the night stretched endless and the auroras shimmered like spirits pacing the sky, people swore the earth itself began to move to the rhythm. A shaman's ceremony wasn't what Hollywood would expect. No explosions, no special effects, just the quiet intensity of someone tapping their hand against the membrane of existence. The air grew thick. The flame flickered strangely, and sometimes, just for a moment, everyone in the room forgot where their bodies ended. That was the point. Shamans used their drum journeys for everything: healing the sick, calming storms, locating lost hunters, or negotiating with Sedna, the sea woman, when she tangled her hair in anger and locked away the fish. They didn't just pray, they traveled. They'd describe leaving their bodies, soaring over glaciers, diving through oceans, visiting spirit villages where ancestors waited by lamps of blue flame. One Sami Noaidi, named Rasti, was said to drum so powerfully that his spirit animal, a white raven, appeared beside him, visible to everyone. When the drumming stopped, the bird vanished. The next morning, the storm that had trapped the herders for weeks finally broke. Coincidence? Maybe. But in a world where storms could last a lifetime, coincidences deserved respect. The Sami called their drum the runebom, decorated with symbols, suns, reindeer, stars, gods, and spirits. Each mark was a map of the universe. When the Noaidi beat the drum and watched how a ring or pendulum moved across it, they read it like a cosmic GPS, where to hunt, when to travel, who needed help. It was a mix of rhythm, intuition, and weather forecasting that worked surprisingly, well before satellites existed. Of course, the missionaries hated this. When Christianity reached the Arctic, shamans were declared dangerous, not because they were evil, but because they were effective. Drums were confiscated, ceremonies banned, and some shamans were forced to destroy their instruments. But you can't outlaw rhythm. People still drummed softly in secret, with hands, with feet, with hearts. Even today, Sami musicians and Inuit healers keep that pulse alive, blending the old songs with new sounds, letting the beat sneak past time itself. Modern scientists studying trance states might talk about brain waves and dopamine release. But those old shamans didn't need EEGs. They already knew what it felt like to step out of time, to dissolve into vibration and come back changed. They said the drum wasn't a tool, it was a companion. And when you drummed long enough, you could feel it breathing back. There's something hypnotic about that, the idea that music isn't made for the world, but with it. That every sound, the crack of ice, the groan of glaciers, the howl of wolves, is part of one long song, and the shaman's job is to keep the tempo steady. Imagine it now, a small circle of people inside a snow house. The air smells of whale oil and pine smoke. The flame flickers. The shaman sits in the center, eyes half closed, hand rising and falling against the drum. The sound starts small, thump, 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 like a slow heartbeat. Then faster. The pitch deepens. Someone hums softly. The walls seem to breathe, and for a moment, you can't tell if the sound is coming from the drum, the wind, or your own chest. Outside, the aurora curls across the sky, green and gold, pulsing in time. Maybe it's coincidence, or maybe it's the universe tapping its foot along. Because in the end, the Arctic doesn't separate the natural from the supernatural. It just calls it all weather. And the shaman's drum? It's the sound of weather remembering it has a soul. So if you ever hear a slow, steady rhythm while drifting off to sleep, a heartbeat, a pulse, a faint tapping from somewhere deep inside the night, don't be afraid. It's probably not a ghost. It's just the Arctic, keeping time. When Russia marched north, chasing oil, fur, and glory, it didn't just bring engineers and explorers. It brought ghosts. They arrived quietly, tucked into train cars and ship hulls, hidden between maps and rations. And when the Soviets built their lonely outposts along the Arctic coast, the ghosts moved in first, choosing the warm beds and the quiet corners. The Arctic in Russia is a strange place, part myth, part monument, part mistake. It's where empire met emptiness, and emptiness didn't flinch. Even the most loyal party members found themselves whispering prayers when the polar night set in, and the wind started speaking in old languages. Officially, of course, ghosts did not exist. The Soviet Union was a nation of science, steel, and rationality. There was no column in the 5-year plan labeled haunting. But unofficially, every mining town, research base, and radar station had at least one. Take, for example, Pyramiden, the famous ghost town on Svalbard, a Soviet mining settlement built in what looks like the set of a Cold War musical, filmed entirely in grayscale. They had a swimming pool, a music hall, even a bust of Lenin that's still staring across the fjord today, waiting for someone to clock out. When the town was abandoned in the 1990s, everything was left behind. Pianos, teacups, half-read newspapers, the smell of coal dust. Visitors now say they can hear faint piano notes echoing through the gymnasium, though the keys have long been frozen stiff. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's nostalgia refusing to die. In the Arctic, they're the same thing. Further east in Siberia, miners in the 1950s reported seeing glowing figures near their shafts at night, shapes that shimmered like heat haze but gave off no warmth. One man claimed he followed the light thinking it was a co-worker's lantern, only to find his friend still asleep in the bunkhouse. When he turned back, the light had vanished, but his footprints were already filling with snow. Locals called them the Beli Liudi, the white people, not a racial term, but a spiritual one. They were the souls of those who'd perished building the gulags and railroads of the permafrost, condemned to wander the tundra forever, still punching the eternal time clock. Even the soldiers stationed nearby learned to nod respectfully when the wind glowed pale blue. You can't arrest weather. There was also a widespread belief in the house spirit, the domovoi, even up here, in prefabricated Soviet barracks and concrete bunkers. He wasn't Arctic by birth, but he adapted quickly, curling up near boilers and radiators, watching the workers through the frost. If you left a bit of bread and salt out at night, your machinery would behave the next morning. If you didn't, well, good luck starting the generator. Even Marx couldn't talk people out of feeding him. Some scientists at the polar research stations joked about it until their instruments started acting strange. Ghosts of electricity, they called it. Radios turning on by themselves, voices caught on tape recorders that didn't belong to anyone in camp. The Soviets blamed static interference, but static doesn't hum your name. One Arctic geologist, writing in his diary in 1963, described the polar mirages that appeared during long nights, visions of entire towns shimmering in the sky above the horizon. He said it looked like heaven was holding up a mirror. Sometimes, he wrote, I think we are the reflection, not them. Then, in the next line, he added, heating system malfunctioning again. A scientist to the end. It's easy to forget that the Arctic was once a Soviet dream, the final frontier of progress. But progress doesn't fare well in eternal darkness. People went north, believing they were conquering the wilderness, only to realize the wilderness was politely tolerating them. And in the silence between radio transmissions, when the aurora hummed faintly above the snow, many of them swore they heard footsteps outside their cabins. Some said it was comrades coming home late. Others said it was the ghosts of the old Arctic shamans, amused that the communists thought they could evict them. By the 1980s, the government stopped trying to explain away the superstitions. It was bad for morale, so they simply stopped printing them. But the stories kept spreading, on the wind, through the crackle of radios, in the sigh of engines starting up in the dark. And if you visit those old outposts today, you can still feel it. That sense of half-remembered presence, that uneasy balance between technology and mystery. The power lines hum, the snow glows faintly blue from the aurora, and somewhere, a piano key clicks by itself. Maybe it's science, maybe it's loneliness, echoing through steel. Or maybe, just maybe, the Soviet dream was never truly abandoned. It just moved on to a colder afterlife, where ideology freezes but music still plays. Because even ghosts, it turns out, respect the rhythm of a 5-year plan. The Arctic is full of ghost towns, not the kind with swinging saloon doors and tumbleweeds. Those need too much sunlight. These are quieter. Entire settlements sealed in ice, frozen mid-sentence, waiting for someone to finish the story. Somewhere beneath a crust of snow, there's always a door that never closed, a table set for dinner, a cup that still smells faintly of tea. The wind howls through the gaps and rearranges everything, not out of malice, just boredom. The Arctic doesn't destroy, it preserves. That's what makes these places unsettling. They're not ruins in the usual sense. They're paused, like someone hit save game on civilization and then wandered off for 1,000 years. You can find them scattered across Greenland, Svalbard, northern Canada, and Siberia. Mining outposts, whaling stations, radar bases, research camps, and fishing villages that outlived their usefulness. When the coal ran out, or the whales vanished, or the ice decided to move in, people left. But the cold didn't. It stayed behind, tending the memories. Take Kulisat, on Greenland's west coast. Once home to more than 1,000 people, it was abandoned in the 1970s when a landslide destroyed the harbor. Today, the houses still stand, wooden walls frosted white, curtains frozen mid-flutter. Sometimes visitors swear they hear laughter carried by the wind from the old dance hall. Others say it's just the sea ice cracking. But if you listen long enough, the difference stops mattering. Then there's Pyramiden, the Soviet mining town you met in the last chapter. Lenin still gazing proudly across the glacier, his audience long gone. Tour guides say that in winter, the sound of dripping water echoes through the empty corridors, as if the buildings themselves are thawing out memories. At night, foxes walk the streets like ghosts in fur coats. They look perfectly at home. The humans were always the strangers here. Farther east in Siberia lies Katichan, another deserted town built for miners, emptied by explosions and politics. Everything remains. The school chalkboards, the shoes by the doors, the portraits of officials who still look unimpressed. In summer, moss grows through the floors. In winter, the town looks like a photograph of itself. Too still, too perfect, too quiet. Locals who pass nearby avoid saying the town's names after dark. It's not superstition exactly, it's politeness. Because in Arctic folklore, places have souls too. When a town dies, suddenly, its spirit lingers, confused, cold, still expecting the factory whistle to blow. You don't want to startle it awake. Hunters tell of lights flickering in windows long after a settlement is gone, a single bulb glowing where no power lines remain. Pilots have seen entire villages reflected in the clouds, like mirages. They call them ice echoes. Scientists chalk it up to refraction. Storytellers call it memory made visible. Even the ground remembers. In the far north, permafrost keeps everything intact. Wood, fabric, bones, even footprints. You can still find sled marks carved into the frozen soil, perfectly preserved centuries later, as if the travelers had just passed by. In the Arctic, the past doesn't fade. It just waits for better weather. There's a haunting kind of mercy in that. These ghost towns aren't tragedies. They're museums without guides. They hold proof that humans tried, and that trying mattered, even if it didn't last. Some modern explorers and photographers go north every year to document them. They wander through classrooms filled with dust and silence, through living rooms with Soviet calendars forever stuck on April. They call it urban exploration, but the Arctic would probably call it trespassing. One visitor to an abandoned station in Nunavut once wrote that he heard a radio crackle to life when he entered, whispering in static, "Still here." He checked the batteries. They were corroded decades ago. The next morning, the radio was silent. Sometimes the Arctic doesn't need electricity to communicate. The truth is, nothing in the north really disappears. It just goes quiet. And the quiet there is deep, the kind that hums in your bones, that feels like listening to the earth breathe through its sleep. So when you stand in one of these frozen towns, surrounded by empty houses and perfect stillness, you don't feel fear. You feel company. The ghosts aren't angry. They're content. Someone finally came back. The snow presses against the walls like a blanket. The wind sighs through the chimneys, tuning itself into a song you almost recognize. And as the aurora flickers faintly above, the ice catches the light, sending it skittering through broken windows, tiny lanterns in a city of glass. For a moment, you could almost believe the town is waking up, that doors will open, that someone will wave from a window smiling as if you were late but expected. And then, just as softly, the illusion fades. The light moves on, the wind continues its route, and the Arctic closes the book for another night. Because here, ghosts aren't trapped, they're preserved. And preservation, in a place like this, is just another word for love. Technically, Antarctica isn't part of the Arctic. It's the world's mirror, the other pole, the upside-down twin that traded polar bears for penguins, and darkness for a different kind of emptiness. But cold is a universal language, and ghosts, it seems, are bilingual. The first explorers who set foot on Antarctica thought they were alone. That was their first mistake. Because Antarctica, for all its silence, has a way of watching. Not in a sinister sense, more like the polite curiosity of an ancient librarian noticing you've wandered into the wrong section. They called it the White Silence. Not because it was peaceful, but because it had weight. It pressed down on you, filling your ears until even your heartbeat sounded like an intruder. When the wind stopped, men swore they could hear the ice moving, a slow, aching sound, as if the continent itself was breathing in its sleep. Some said that was the sound of time down here. Slower, heavier, too tired to keep up with the rest of the world. A single glacier could move a few centimeters a year, carrying entire centuries along for the ride. And when those glaciers cracked, the echoes rolled for miles, like distant thunder remembering its youth. The British explorers of the early 1900s, Scott, Shackleton, Amundsen, brought with them the usual luggage, rations, flags, and a healthy dose of Victorian arrogance. They believed they were conquering a blank map. But Antarctica had been doing just fine without them. At night, when the wind shrieked around the tents and the temperature dropped to something unprintable, men wrote in their journals about strange sensations, footsteps crunching outside when no one was there, murmurs just beyond the canvas, a light that moved against the blizzard's direction. The official explanation was exhaustion, hypothermia, or the boredom of frostbite. The unofficial one was that they weren't alone. One diary entry from 1911 reads, "Saw 3 figures walking ahead through the fog. Counted them twice. We are only 2. Another, from Shackleton's ill-fated expedition, mentions a presence that joined them during their desperate trek back to camp. Unseen, but palpable. They called it the third man, the feeling that someone else was keeping pace beside them. Religious men called it divine intervention. The rest just called it company. The legend of the third man stuck. Later climbers and polar researchers reported the same thing, an invisible companion arriving precisely when hope started to crack. No voice, no face, just a warmth, not physical, but emotional, that pushed them 1 more mile forward. A shared hallucination? Maybe. But the Antarctic has a habit of turning hallucinations into roommates. Even scientists today, working in high-tech research bases with Wi-Fi and espresso machines, talk about the presence. During the long winter, 6 months without sunrise, people report vivid dreams, voices, and the uncanny sense that someone is standing just behind them. One physicist described it perfectly. It's like the ice itself grows eyes after midnight. It's easy to laugh at that until you remember what Antarctica really is. Not just a continent, but a frozen time capsule. Everything that has ever fallen here stays. Snowflakes from the Roman Empire still lie buried under the ice. Footprints from the first explorers remain intact, fossilized in wind. If ghosts exist anywhere, they'd choose a place that never melts. And Antarctica, for all its hostility, has its own kind of beauty. The light there isn't like light anywhere else. It doesn't shine. It hovers. The horizon glows as if lit from within, a kind of permanent dawn that never quite arrives. When the wind picks up, snowdrifts swirl in slow spirals that look uncannily like dancers, translucent, weightless, endless. Maybe that's why so many people describe the ice as alive. It shifts, hums, and occasionally decides to rearrange its furniture without asking permission. One researcher at McMurdo Station once said, "The longer you stay, the more the place begins to talk." He didn't mean metaphorically. Ice can make sound, creaks, pops, long groaning moans that rise from below, sometimes for hours. At first, you think it's the building settling. Then you realize it's the continent speaking. And by then, it's rude not to listen. If the Arctic feels haunted by memory, Antarctica feels haunted by potential. The ghosts of futures that never happened. Cities that might have been. Explorers that almost returned. Warmth that once existed. Everything down here feels on pause, waiting for someone to press play. There's an old joke among polar researchers. If you stay long enough, you start naming the wind. That's how the place works. Isolation becomes companionship. Silence becomes music. And the endless white becomes a mirror for whatever you bring with you. If you arrive hopeful, you'll see wonder. If you arrive haunted, the ghosts will help unpack. So if you ever find yourself standing at the bottom of the world, surrounded by light so pale, it feels like memory. Listen closely. You might hear footsteps crunching in perfect rhythm beside yours. Don't worry, they've been here longer than you. They know the way back. And when the ice cracks like a sigh and the wind changes direction, take it as a hello from a continent that never sleeps and a few ghosts that never left. There are few phrases that sound less practical than trick or treat, followed by wear 2 pairs of gloves. But in the Arctic, even ghosts have to dress for the weather. When Halloween finally made its slow, shivering crawl northward, it arrived wearing a parka. What started as a Celtic festival of bonfires and mild discomfort somehow turned into an event held in places where a carved pumpkin can literally freeze solid before sunset. And yet, people still do it. Modern Arctic towns like Tromsø, Kiruna, and Nuuk have embraced Halloween with the same dry humor that keeps them alive through months of darkness. There are costumes, candy, decorations, just more layers. Princesses wear snow boots, vampires wear thermal underwear, and superheroes have reflective stripes for safety. The Arctic doesn't stop for fashion. Parents joke that the real horror of Northern Halloween isn't the ghosts. It's trying to get toddlers into snowsuits shaped like pumpkins. By the time you've wrestled them into fleece gloves and scarves, the doorbell rings again, and you realize you've dressed the wrong child. Still, the joy of it all is undeniable. Imagine a street under the glow of the aurora borealis, every doorway lit with candles protected by glass jars, so the wind doesn't steal them. Children shuffle from house to house, their voices muffled by scarves. The candy they receive isn't just chocolate, it's survival fuel. Wrapped caramels, tiny energy bars, and occasionally dried fish for the traditionalists. You know you live in the Arctic when your trick-or-treat bag smells faintly of salmon. Local shops get creative too. The bakeries in Tromsø make polar pumpkin pastries, cinnamon rolls shaped like jack-o'-lanterns, and cafes serve ghost cocoa, which is really just regular cocoa that costs slightly more in October. In Greenland, some families carve ice lanterns instead of pumpkins, placing candles inside blocks of clear frozen water. They glow softly like captive auroras until the next snow covers them. Even the reindeer get festive. In the Sami regions, herders sometimes tie reflective ribbons to the animals' antlers during the dark season, partly for safety, partly because nothing says holiday spirit like a glowing reindeer wandering through town at midnight. Tourists think it's decoration. Locals know it's just good traffic etiquette. Of course, Halloween at 40 below comes with its own set of rules. Rule 1. Never show fangs. They might stick. Rule 2. Never choose a costume that involves running. Traction isn't iwizawiv. Illusion. Rule 3. If your mask fogs up, congratulations, you're still breathing. The best part, though, might be the community halls. When the weather gets too rough for door-to-door haunting, everyone gathers indoors, kids, parents, elders, for what is essentially the Arctic's answer to a block party. There's music, homemade costumes, and storytelling. Someone inevitably tells the tale of the polar pumpkin, a mythical gourd that grew on a whaling ship's deck and cursed anyone who forgot to water it. No one knows who invented the story, but it's been keeping children entertained and mildly confused for years. Outside, meanwhile, the night glows faintly blue. The snow crunches under boots, and the air smells of bonfire smoke and cold metal. Even the northern lights seem to join the celebration, rippling across the sky in ghostly greens and purples, like the universe showing off its costume. And somewhere on the edge of town, in the old traditions that never quite vanished, there's another kind of Halloween happening, quieter, older, truer. Families still light small lamps on the windowsill, the modern descendants of the whale oil flames that once guarded the night. They leave a little food outside, a nod to the ancestors, a whispered thank you to the ones who walked these frozen paths before them. Because no matter how modern Halloween becomes, the Arctic never forgets its ghosts. The children, of course, know none of this. They're too busy sliding across icy sidewalks, laughing through scarves, and trying to see how many layers of clothing it takes before they can no longer bend their elbows. Their parents follow close behind, calling out reminders like, "Don't lick the railing," and "That's not snow, that's salt." And yet, in between the giggles and the cold, something quietly beautiful happens. For one night, the endless dark doesn't feel so big. The streets glow, the air hums with life, and even the oldest spirits watching from the hills probably smile to see the living making such a cheerful fuss about survival. By midnight, the candles burn low. The candy bags are heavy, the boots are heavier, and the world feels warm again, at least from the inside. The last children are dragged home, leaving small trails of footprints that the snow quickly fills. In the morning, everything looks untouched, as if the night never happened. But the lamps still burn faintly in a few windows, a reminder that even at 40 below, even in a land built from silence and frost, there's still room for laughter, light, and a little harmless mischief. Because up here, Halloween isn't about fear, it's about warmth, the rarest treat of all. If you've ever seen the Northern Lights, you already understand why so many people think the sky is alive. They twist, shimmer, and dance with a kind of slow, silent confidence, like the universe practicing yoga. And the thing about the aurora is, once you've seen it, it never really leaves you. It stays behind your eyelids, flickering whenever you close your eyes, as if the sky followed you home. But to Arctic peoples, those lights weren't just decoration. They were spirits. Bright, playful, unpredictable spirits. Not angels, not ghosts in sheets. Something in between. Ancestors stretching their legs after a long eternity. Inuit stories tell that the aurora are the souls of the dead, playing a celestial game with a walrus skull. Some versions say it's a ball of light. Others say it's a severed head. Either way, it's a sporting event that really puts soccer to shame. The shimmering waves of color? That's the flicker of their robes and laughter, spreading joy across the night. Children were told never to whistle at the Northern Lights. If you did, the spirits might swoop down and take your head to use as the next ball. And honestly, that's one way to keep kids quiet during long Arctic nights. In Greenland, the aurora had a gentler interpretation. They were the souls of stillborn children, dancing in the heavens, lighting up the darkness to comfort their parents below. It's one of those rare stories that manages to be both heartbreaking and soothing at the same time. Grief turned into beauty. For the Sami people of northern Scandinavia, the lights were sacred, not playful. They believed the aurora carried energy from the souls of the departed. If you mocked them, whistled, or waved a white cloth, the lights might sweep down and strike you. Not out of malice, but because you'd broken the spell of silence that keeps the worlds apart. So when the lights appeared, people stopped talking. They just stood there, still, breathless, listening. That's the thing most people forget about the aurora. They make no sound. None. You can't hear them, but you feel them. A kind of low, invisible hum that settles somewhere between your ribs and your soul. Some scientists claim there actually is a faint crackling noise caused by charged particles colliding high in the atmosphere. But deep down, we know it's more than physics. It's a conversation we were never meant to interrupt. In the 1800s, when European missionaries tried to correct Arctic beliefs, they quickly gave up explaining the aurora scientifically. Because even the most devout priest, after watching green fire ripple across the horizon for the first time, usually ended up saying, "Okay, yes, that's ghosts." And who could blame them? Standing beneath the aurora feels like standing beneath an enormous cathedral made of air and magnetism. No walls, no floor, no organ, just light singing silently above you. If heaven exists, it probably looks like that. Of course, the Arctic being the Arctic, not every aurora sighting was awe and poetry. There are old stories of hunters caught out on the ice during strong displays, the sky burning red like blood, the snow glowing orange. They thought it was the end of the world. One man from Nunavut claimed he heard voices calling his name in the wind, urging him to follow the lights north. He made it home, but he never hunted again. He said the dead had enough company. To this day, the northern lights remain a barometer of wonder. They remind the living that the boundary between life and death, between warmth and cold, noise and silence, can be as thin as air. And that maybe the dead aren't gone. They've just learned better dance moves. Scientists, of course, describe the aurora in terms of solar wind, charged particles, and magnetic fields. Beautiful words if you say them slowly enough. But even they admit the aurora does something strange to the human brain. It makes people go quiet. It makes them cry for no reason. It makes even the most skeptical meteorologist stare upward like a child seeing fireflies for the first time. The Sami say the lights appear most brightly over those who remember their ancestors. Maybe that's just coincidence. Or maybe memory itself bends light. So imagine it now. You're standing outside, wrapped in fur and breath, your boots crunching against the snow. The sky ripples green and gold, a curtain that moves without wind. Somewhere far above, laughter echoes soundlessly across space, playful, gentle, eternal. You close your eyes. The colors stay. For a moment, you can almost feel hands, warm, weightless, brushing your shoulders, reminding you that you're part of a story much bigger than the one you can see. Then, just as quietly as it began, the aurora fades. The sky returns to black. The snow sighs beneath your feet, and you realize the lights haven't gone at all. They've simply gone back to where they came from, to the afterlife, to the ancestors, to wherever color is born. And when you finally drift to sleep, maybe you'll dream in green. Maybe you'll dream of a sky that never stops moving, and ghosts who never stop dancing. Because up here, even the heavens can't resist a little mischief. If Halloween in the Arctic has a heartbeat, it's made of candlelight. Not neon, not LEDs, not even fire roaring in a hearth, just hundreds of small, stubborn flames moving through the dark. It's called, in many northern towns, the Candle Parade, a quiet tradition that appears every year when the darkness feels longest and the people need to remind the night who's boss. It isn't officially a holiday. There's no mayoral speech, no advertising, no marching band. It simply happens. One evening after sunset, which, depending on the latitude, might mean sometime around lunch, people begin to gather. They bring candles tucked into glass jars, small lanterns, and sometimes ice blocks hollowed out to hold the flames. Children hold theirs with mittened hands, faces glowing orange beneath woolen hats. Adults walk beside them, chatting softly. There, breath curling up like smoke signals. There's no shouting, no loud music. Just the sound of boots crunching over snow and the low hum of old songs, the kind you don't need words for. The idea began, centuries ago, as a promise, to keep the light alive until the sun returned. In the old days, when the polar night stretched on endlessly, the lamps of whale oil were never allowed to go out. Now, the tradition lives on in miniature. One night of shared illumination in honor of all the others who kept watch before electricity made it easy. In northern Norway, the parade starts near the harbor. People walk along the frozen waterfront, their reflections flickering on the ice. Fishermen light candles on the edges of their boats, offerings for those who never came home. It's part remembrance, part resilience. Each candle burns for a story. In Greenland, it's simpler still. Families step outside after dinner, plant candles in the snow near their doors, and let them glow until the wind decides otherwise. Some burn for minutes, some for hours. All of them together create a shimmering field of light that looks, from a distance, like the stars have fallen to earth to warm their feet. And in Lapland, where the Sami still keep their herds, the herders sometimes join in too. Lanterns swinging from their sleds, reindeer snorting clouds of silver breath as they move along the trails. It's like watching constellations on the move. To outsiders, it might look like nothing more than a quaint local custom. But for those who live there, it's something deeper. An act of defiance, wrapped in gentleness. You can't fight the Arctic darkness. It's too big. But you can outshine it for a while. Every child who grows up in these regions remembers their first candle parade, the nervous excitement of carrying real fire, the way your parents hover just close enough to grab it if your mittens slip, the quiet awe when you see the line of lights stretching down the street. It's one of those rare moments when the world feels both enormous and safe. And then, at the end of the walk, everyone gathers, sometimes in a park, sometimes on a hill, sometimes simply where the wind stops biting. The candles are placed together in one large circle, a glowing crown against the snow. People stand silently around it for a while. Someone might whisper a prayer. Someone else might tell a story. Most just breathe, feeling the warmth on their faces, knowing that, for this moment, no one is alone. You can tell the exact moment the Arctic approves. The wind calms, the air grows still, and above, the aurora stirs, soft ribbons of green light unfurling, joining the little flames below in perfect harmony. It's as if the ancestors decided to attend, politely, without RSVP. There are versions of this ritual all across the far north. In Iceland, it's called ljósnótt, the night of lights. In Finland, it sometimes merges with All Saints' Day, when candles are left at graves under snow so deep it muffles the sound of footsteps. In Canada's Northern Territories, it's become a fundraiser for charity, because even tradition benefits from a bake sale. But everywhere, the feeling is the same. A shared wordless understanding that light matters. That warmth is something we have to build together. Eventually, the cold wins, as it always does. The wax stiffens. The flames bend and gutter out one by one. People turn for home, stomping snow off their boots, carrying the smell of smoke and melted wax with them like perfume from the past. And the darkness returns, not angry, just patient. But it's different now, because it's been reminded. And somewhere deep in that vast silence, the night itself seems to sigh, almost happily, before settling back into its usual routine of guarding the stars. So if you ever find yourself far north on one of those long nights, and you see a line of moving lights winding across the snow, don't be alarmed. You're watching hope in its purest form, portable, flickering, persistent, And if you're invited to join, take a candle. The cold won't mind. It's used to losing, at least for one night. The Arctic is a generous host to science. It gives you ice cores, aurora data, magnetosphere tantrums, and snow that falls in 100 different personalities, all of them named Crunch. But every so often, science comes up here to measure the world. And the world measures back. Researchers like tidy variables. The polar night, however, is a messy constant. You can calibrate an instrument. You can't calibrate a feeling, not the one that arrives at 0317 when the wind dies, the generator hum dips, and the darkness leans in like a curious librarian. Ask around any modern field station, and you'll hear the polite version first. Oh yes, we had some anomalies. Which is scientists speak for. Something weird happened, and we refuse to use the word haunted in the report. There's the classic door that opens itself. The latch is solid, the air is still, and then, click. Someone mutters about pressure differentials. Someone else wedges a boot against it and pretends not to watch. Later, the boot is on the other side of the room. The official explanation is vibrations. The unofficial explanation is nope. Then there are the footprints that start from nowhere. Fresh snow, no wind. A line of prints appears from the middle of the yard, crosses to the weather hut, and stops at the door like they're waiting to be let in. Fox? Maybe? Human? Hopefully not. By morning, the prints are gone, as if the night reached up and buttoned its coat. Radios also enjoy mischief. Engineers will tell you about skywave propagation and ionospheric bounce, which are excellent phrases that taste like electricity. But at 2 a.m, when you hear your name whispered through a channel that's turned off, theory feels like a very small blanket. Of course, there are perfectly sensible phenomena at work up here. The atmosphere bends light, the snow eats sound, the cold squeezes metal until it sings. Some recordings of voices turn out to be infrasound, waves too low for conscious hearing that still push on your skin like a rumor. Your brain, eager to be helpful, translates those pressures into syllables that sound like, come outside. Then there's the third man, the classic polar companion you met in Antarctica. He shows up in the Arctic too, as soon as a solo traverse becomes too quiet and the horizon forgets to move. A gloved hand seems to rest lightly on your shoulder. A pace matches yours at the edge of vision. Most scientists chalk it up to stress, fatigue, the brain's emergency friend generator. But a few leave an extra seat at the mess table anyway. Hospitality costs nothing. Psychologists have a name for the mind's winter drift, T3 syndrome, the season when the dark and the cold take tiny taxes from your attention, memory, and mood. You set down a spanner and it evaporates into the tundra, only to reappear in your pocket like a guilty magician. You're sure you shut off the lab lights. They're glowing when you return. You start keeping lists, then lists of lists, then a tidy notebook labeled, I definitely did this. Right beside it, another, the station did it. Even the instruments seem to play along. A magnetometer draws a perfect curve, then hiccups at the exact moment someone mentions a name you haven't said in years. A camera aimed at the sky picks up a faint luminous smear shaped exactly like a handprint on glass. Condensation? Lens artifact? Probably. But the technician who cleans the lens does it gently, as if apologizing. Veterans learn small rituals that aren't in any handbook. You greet the empty hallway before you walk it. You tap the barometer twice, not once. You leave the stairwell light on during storms. For the late shift, even when everyone is accounted for, no one believes these things matter, except on the nights when they do. And every station has its story room, the place where the acoustics are wrong. Sometimes it's the old radio shack. Sometimes it's the freezer corridor where the air feels heavier than the meat racks. You step inside and sound lands differently, like snow on felt. You say hello without meaning to. Something in the walls says hello back, using the polite grammar of temperature and time. To their credit, Scientists don't discard folk sense. They fold it in. A glaciologist will tell you a crevasse moans because of thermal contraction, and also because the glacier is a bit sulky today. An aurora physicist will write elegant equations and still step outside to watch the lights in silence, hat off, like entering a chapel. The respect is the method. The overlap shows up in data too. An ethnographer maps local tales of no-go nights, times when elders warned against travel because the land is walking. A meteorologist overlays wind fields, pressure drops, and infrasound bursts. The match is persuasive. Call it cultural meteorology. The old rules are weather models with better bedside manner. And then there are the visitors who didn't expect to feel anything at all. Software engineers on instrument duty, satellite techs, swapping boards, the sort of people who carry hex keys like rosaries. They arrive skeptical and leave courteous. One writes a note and pins it by the door. To whom it may concern. Thanks for not tripping the breaker during the update. The breaker, previously unreliable, behaves for the rest of the season. Maybe the simplest truth is this. The Arctic is full of thresholds. Between frozen and flowing, between light and not light, between measured and felt. Scientists stand on those thresholds for a living. It would be stranger if nothing ever looked back. So if you find yourself in a field hut while the night idles outside, and a hinge ticks once with no draft, and the radio coughs a syllable that sounds like your name, do what the professionals do. Check your instruments, log the anomaly, then pour a second cup of tea and set it beside the first. Leave it there a while. In the morning, you'll swear the steam traced two different paths in the air. Winter in the Arctic doesn't just cover the world, it tucks it in. Every living thing, from moss to musk, ox, slows, quiets, curls inward. Even the air seems drowsy, moving in thick, lazy sighs between the hills. And somewhere inside that stillness, time stops keeping score. Locals call it the long sleep, though most of them stay awake through it. It's less about closing your eyes and more about agreeing, temporarily, to do nothing impressive. The sun has vanished, the world is hibernating, and so should you, at least in spirit. Animals, of course, take the instruction literally. The bears dig dens. The Arctic fox curls its tail around its nose like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Even the ptarmigan, that small snow-colored bird, fluffs into a perfect circle and dreams of spring. But humans? We pretend we're exceptions. We keep working, building, scrolling, insisting we're immune to the season's lullaby. Yet sooner or later, the dark wins. Not cruelly, just persuasively. One morning you wake up and realize you've been moving slower for weeks. You stare at a cup of tea long enough for it to go cold, and it feels correct. The Arctic calls this wisdom, not laziness. To rest, after all, is the body's way of saying, I understand the assignment. In the old days, villages adapted their rhythm entirely. Travel stopped, hunting eased. People gathered indoors to mend tools, tell stories, and sleep whenever their eyelids voted yes. Days blurred into nights, nights blurred into naps. No one asked what time it was, because the answer was always dark. And somehow, that was enough. Children were told that during these months, the earth itself was sleeping, and that too much noise might wake it prematurely. So they spoke softly, laughed quietly, and learned the fine art of tiptoeing over snow. It's amazing what 1,000 years of bedtime etiquette can do for a culture's patience. There were legends, too, about travelers who resisted the long sleep, who tried to stay busy while the world rested. One tale speaks of a man who refused to stop working on his sled. He carved and hammered and sanded through the night, muttering that sleep was for the weak. By dawn, his footprints led out onto the frozen sea and simply ended. Some say he followed his own echo until it disappeared. Others say the night, offended, gently adopted him. Even modern scientists feel the pull. At research stations, winter months take on a dreamlike rhythm. Breakfast at noon, dinner at midnight, naps whenever the generator hum lulls you there. It's not fatigue, it's participation. The body senses the long pause of the planet and decides to join the rehearsal. Psychologists have studied the phenomenon. Decreased serotonin, circadian drift, all that sterile vocabulary for what poets already knew. Darkness is persuasive. It invites reflection, and reflection is exhausting. So everyone slows down, not out of weakness, but courtesy. You can't rush through a lullaby. The Sami once said that sleep during the long night was a form of travel. Dreams weren't personal, they were communal. A shared map drawn each evening, connecting people across miles of snow. When someone dreamed of a herd or a fire or a song, it meant those things were safe for everyone. In this way, rest became both medicine and communication, a nightly town meeting conducted entirely in the subconscious. That idea lingers even now. Arctic researchers describe vivid shared dreams during the darkest months. Recurring images of light, water, movement. Maybe it's just the brain's way of manufacturing sunlight. Maybe it's something older. Either way, no one complains. It's the one kind of data that doesn't need peer review. The long sleep has another side, though, the waking. That delicate, miraculous moment when the first rays of the returning sun brush the snow and everything blinks in disbelief. People step outside squinting, shielding their eyes like hungover gods. The air smells new. Even the dogs look surprised. For a few seconds, the entire Arctic feels like it's exhaling in unison. But until then, the world keeps dreaming. And maybe that's what makes the North feel so ancient. It knows how to rest without apology. It knows that stillness is an act of survival, not surrender. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine this. You're lying under blankets, heavy as snowdrifts. Outside, the lamps burn low. The wind hums softly, slow enough to count. You can almost feel the earth beneath you, vast and half asleep, its heartbeat deep and slow. You breathe in rhythm with it. You become part of the lullaby. And somewhere out there, beyond the ice and the dark, the first whisper of spring is stretching, yawning, and deciding to hit snooze one more time. After months of darkness, the Arctic dawn doesn't really arrive. It tiptoes in. First, there's a glow on the horizon, faint as a held breath. Then a thread of color, pink or gold or something in between. And finally, one morning, the light stops pretending. The sun pushes its way over the edge of the world and blinks like it forgot how. It's never dramatic. The Arctic doesn't do drama, it does understatement. The light isn't warm, not yet, but it's alive, and that's enough. People step outside their homes, shielding their eyes, smiling awkwardly, unsure whether to wave or bow. Some laugh, some cry, some just stare, hypnotized, as the shadows remember how to exist. For the old Arctic peoples, this moment was sacred, not a sunrise, but a resurrection. It meant the world had survived its own death. The sun had finished its long journey through the underworld and decided mercifully to return. And in that instant, every ghost, spirit, and ancestor that had kept the dark company could finally rest. There were rituals for this. Families would step outside and light fires, tiny ones, so as not to blind the newborn day. They'd lift their hands toward the sky, palms open, to catch the sunlight and draw it down to their faces. Children mimicked their parents, squinting through mittens, giggling at the brightness. And in the distance, the snow reflected everything back, millions of tiny mirrors saying, "Welcome back." The elders told stories about the first sunrise of creation, how it wasn't just the beginning of light, but the end of loneliness. The sun wasn't a god to be worshipped, they said. It was a relative who simply went away for a while, got cold feet, and then came home hungry. And so every year, when it returned, The people cooked feasts and left food outside, not for themselves, but for the spirits who had guarded them through the dark. Those spirits were said to be tired by then. Even the supernatural needs a nap after 6 months of night shift. The lamps that had burned for the dead were slowly extinguished, one by one, to let them rest. The flame wasn't snuffed, it was bowed out, like saying goodnight instead of goodbye. For a few nights, the air felt unusually still, as if the invisible world was also catching its breath. Hunters, before their first trip of the new season, would pause at the edge of the sea ice. They'd whisper thanks to the unseen for letting them see the dawn again. Because in the Arctic, survival wasn't just skill, it was permission. And the return of the sun meant that permission had been renewed for another year. Even the animals seemed to celebrate. Ravens appeared first, cackling at the light like gossiping neighbors. Foxes darted out from their burrows, blinking furiously. And far above, the aurora, that polite ghostly curtain, dimmed and withdrew, as if bowing out of the spotlight. For scientists stationed in the far north today, that first sunrise is still a small miracle. After months of artificial lamps and black skies, the simplest colors become emotional events. Someone always cheers. Someone else pretends not to wipe their eyes. And then, quietly, everyone takes turns standing outside, letting sunlight touch their faces as if they're charging like solar panels. Even machines seem happier. Solar arrays wake up from hibernation. Ice crystals gleam like confetti. The wind changes pitch, softer somehow, less lonely, more conversational. It feels like the Arctic itself exhales, shrugging off its long, elegant sleep. Of course, not every ghost goes willingly. Some linger a little, peeking out from the corners of old memories. You might hear a faint echo, a door creaking in an empty research hut, a whisper curling through the snow. But those aren't hauntings anymore. They're goodbyes. The sound of the unseen world clocking out for the season, satisfied that the living can take it from here. And for the people who still carry the old traditions, the candles, the lamps, the stories, dawn is more than relief. It's gratitude. A thank you whispered into the first beam of light, a promise to keep remembering, even when the nights grow shorter. Because up here, light doesn't conquer the dark, it partners with it. Each depends on the other to make the world whole. The night keeps the stories, the day tells them again. So imagine standing there, your boots in the snow, the air tasting faintly of salt and sunlight. You can hear the soft crack of melting ice, the distant flutter of wings, the tiny hiss of flame as someone relights their lamp. This time, for joy, not defense. The world feels clean, almost shy. Even your own breath seems brighter. And as the sun climbs higher, spilling warmth into the edges of shadow, you get the feeling that the spirits are watching from far away. Tired, proud, smiling. They've done their work. They've guarded the silence. Now they can rest. And the living, blinking into the first real morning in half a year, can finally say what they've been holding back all winter. We made it. Morning in the Arctic doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps back in slowly, like light poured into a glass too carefully to spill. The snow, after months of moonlight and ghost glow, suddenly looks too white, too honest. It's like waking up after a very long dream and realizing that yes, the monsters were real, but they were also yours. The world looks smaller in daylight. The mountains lose their mystery. The shadows turn out to be perfectly ordinary piles of snow. And all those whispering spirits that filled the long night, they fade quietly, polite to the end, as if stepping out of a crowded theater. That's the secret of Arctic horror. It never really frightens you. It reminds you of how alive the dark can be, of how silence can hold more conversation than sound, and how every story told by firelight isn't about the dead at all. It's about the living learning how to stay that way. When the sun comes back, everyone changes tempo. People start talking faster. The dogs bark louder. Even the ice seems to crack in a happier rhythm. It's the season of movement again, of sleds, hunts, repairs, and optimism. The world thaws, both literally and emotionally. The ghosts go back to wherever ghosts go, and the living get on with the practical magic of survival. Still, for a few mornings after the long night, you can feel them. The leftovers of the dark. A whisper in the corner of your eye. A faint warmth in a place that shouldn't be warm. A lamp that flickers not because of wind, but because something unseen is remembering how to sleep. Children wake to sunlight streaming through windows they'd forgotten had glass. They run outside, blinking and laughing, their boots sinking deep into soft snow that sparkles under real daylight instead of aurora light. Somewhere, an elder sits by the door, smiling, because they've seen this before. They know that joy, like light, always comes back, and that monsters only ever needed an audience. The Arctic morning is full of those quiet goodbyes. The sea ice sighs and cracks as it begins to loosen. The ravens start gossiping again, thrilled to have a visible sky to argue under. The smell of whale oil is replaced by the scent of melting snow and distant salt. Life returns in its shy, stubborn way, the same way it always has. And yet, something lingers. A memory, faint but loyal, of the season when the world slept and dreamed itself into stories. Every carved bone, every flickering lamp, every whispered legend of sea women, shapeshifters, and travelers made of frost, all of it now tucked safely away beneath the snow, waiting for the next dark to wake them again. The Arctic doesn't discard its ghosts, it stores them. It knows that memory is a kind of fuel, something to burn slowly when the next winter comes. Modern life moves on quickly. The Halloween decorations get boxed up, tourists pack their cameras, and researchers file their reports on magnetic flux and unexplained radio anomalies. No one talks much about what they felt, but when night falls again, even for just a few hours, they glance at the horizon and listen, just in case the wind remembers their names. Because once you've lived through an Arctic winter, you understand something simple and profound. Darkness isn't an enemy, it's an environment. And monsters, like people, just want a little attention. The truth is, the Arctic itself is the biggest ghost of all. Ancient, slow, transparent, and always changing shape. Every sound is an echo, every light a reflection, every story a continuation of another. It doesn't scare you, it serenades you. And when the light returns, it lets you go, gently, like a host seeing you off after a long visit. So imagine it now. You step outside into a world washed clean by sunlight. The snow glitters, the air tastes new, and somewhere, a lone candle still burns in a window, a tiny defiance that somehow outlasted the night. You breathe, slow and steady. You can feel the world waking beneath your feet. The monsters are gone, but you don't feel relief. You feel gratitude, because they kept you company, because they reminded you what warmth is for, because they made the dawn mean something. And as you stand there, half awake, half amazed, you realize that the scariest thing about the Arctic night wasn't the ghosts. It was how much you'll miss them. Hey, you made it. The fire's burned low now. The ghosts have gone home. And somewhere outside, the snow has started to fall again. Slow, soft, like it's trying not to wake anyone. We've wandered a long way tonight, across frozen seas, through ghost towns, under aurora skies. We've met sea goddesses and wandering hunters, shapeshifters, wolves that remember names, and scientists who learned to share their tea with the invisible. And through it all, one truth kept surfacing. The dark up here isn't emptiness, it's memory. Every whisper, every crack of ice, every flicker of lamp flame, All of it is the Arctic speaking in its oldest language, a language of patience and cold and kindness. It doesn't shout, it listens, and it teaches you to do the same. Maybe that's why stories like these exist, not to scare, but to slow us down, to remind us that fear and wonder are the same temperature when you hold them long enough, that ghosts and people both just want to be remembered. The Arctic has always known this. It keeps its dead close, not out of grief, but love. It preserves rather than erases. Even the monsters here are caretakers, keeping the silence tidy until we return. And now the sun is rising again, faint and far, painting the snow with the softest gold. The long night has ended, the spirits have drifted back into the light, and the world feels rested. So do you. Take one last deep breath. Listen to the faint hum of the earth turning, to your own heartbeat finding the same rhythm. This is what the Arctic wanted you to know. There's peace in stillness. There's life in the cold. And every darkness ends with a kind of dawn. So close your eyes. Let the stories sink into the snow behind you. Let the ghosts sleep. And if, somewhere in your dreams, you hear a soft knock on the window or a faint howl on the wind, don't be afraid. It's just the Arctic saying goodnight.